be sure to add my.
Hear from Chief Story, and then we'll have questions. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to provide a local law enforcement perspective and really kind of outline some of the challenges we face, not only as law enforcement, but as a community and I believe as a state as a whole. I don't know if this is going to work for me. There we go. I'm going to start with just a quick overview of crime in Las Cruces. And although these statistics are local to the city of Las Cruces, I believe we're seeing the same trend statewide in most jurisdictions. For violent crime, we have seen an increase of approximately 20% in the last 5 years. We fortunately had a reduction of 18% from 22 to 23. But when I show you the 24 numbers year to date, that has been, violent crime is something we are definitely struggling with this year. For property crime, it's pretty drastic, the increase that we have seen. It is essentially a 71% increase in the last 5 years in property crime. We had a slight reduction last year, which is still encouraging because that's the first reduction we've seen in 6 years. And we are continuing that reduction so far this year, but the numbers are still much higher than they should be for our jurisdiction. And this really kind of puts it into context when you look at the amount of crime per 1,000 people compared to the national average. For violent crime, using our 2023 numbers, we were 31.6% higher than the national average and 172.8% higher than the national average for property crime. These are not numbers that I want to give, but this is the reality of where we are right now. And that actually equals or equates to 1 in 17 Las Crucens were a victim of a reported Part 1 crime last year. Keep in mind, Part 1 crimes don't include many things like vandalism or criminal damage to property, which we've seen a huge increase in. And also remember that each jurisdiction has a significant amount of crime that goes unreported. I think the property crime is worse than Albuquerque per 1,000. I apologize. And the reason I'm using this is because there's some videos that I think will, there's some pictures and videos that will really paint a picture of one of the things that we're struggling with. There we go. So year to date for violent crime, we have a 46% increase. Now that's being driven primarily by aggravated assaults and aggravated batteries. And of course, for the way it's reported to the FBI, that includes both. So that's threatening people with guns and knives and other deadly weapons. That's also using them on people, stabbing people, shooting people. And that's the most concerning statistic on there, but also concerning is the increase in homicides that we've seen. Right now, year to date, we're at 15, which as of this week, I believe is still higher than El Paso, who's 6 times bigger than Las Cruces. For property crime, we have seen a reduction. There's only 2 categories we do not have a reduction year to date, and that's in felony theft and misdemeanor shoplifting. The felony theft is also being driven by shoplifting and organized retail crime. And so that's one area I think statewide we've seen an increase. People realize there's less risk to shoplifting than there is to breaking into somebody's car or house. So we've seen an increase in that area. And that's one of the areas that we've tried to put some focus on especially for the second part of 2024. So really some significant challenges that we're facing. Yeah, if you can move, appreciate it. I'm not going to spend time talking about this. I was already here. This committee has heard ad nauseum about competency. I believe that the committee and the legislature as a whole knows this is an issue and is committed to finding a solution. And I'm very confident that in January and February there will be something that passes that will help address the issues with competency. So pretrial detention or bail reform, I'm just going to hit on what the numbers are for recidivism in Las Cruces. I've showed this chart before. The first 3 categories come from studies that go back to the 50s. We added the last category, prolific, because recently we've had so many people with 11 or more arrests in a single year that they really need to be separated out. And so when you look at that category, it kind of tells the tale and paints the picture. In 2018 and 2019, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation because 5 people with 11 or more arrests in Las Cruces wasn't that big of a deal. But when you have 24 and 21, and I'll show you in a second, we're on track to be right around there for 2024, people with 11 or more arrests in a single year, that's a problem. That shouldn't be able to happen in a jurisdiction of 115,000 people. These are our 2024 numbers. This is through the end of September. And really this last category, there's a bunch of numbers on there that are concerning, but I have one person with 39 and one person with 33 arrests so far year to date for the first 3 quarters. again, that's a problem that we have to deal with, whether through different mechanisms, but it's something we need to address. That shouldn't be able to happen in any jurisdiction in New Mexico. Fentanyl and meth, I'm a firm believer that one of the primary drivers of the increase in crime, the increase in homelessness, increase in most of the bad things we have in our communities is fentanyl and methamphetamine. I'm only going to touch on just one kind of metric of that, and that's overdoses in Doña Ana County. That's kind of a convoluted map, but that compares 2023 to 2024, or just shows both the statistics for overdoses. This next slide kind of helps a little bit better. This is for 2022 and 2023, a heat map of overdoses in Doña Ana County, but that's zoomed in on obviously to Las Cruces itself. And the numbers are 1,230 total overdoses in Doña Ana County, 135 fatal overdoses, and 315, or at least 315 naloxone administrations. That number is probably underreported. But 135 fatal overdoses. At the same time, we've seen the availability of Narcan, the use of Narcan, skyrocket as well. So without that, we would probably see a much higher number for fatal overdoses. For an interesting point is if you take a crime map, a heat map for crime, or hotspot map for crime, really no matter how you break it down, whether you just look at violent crime or property crime, all crime or select crime, and you overlay it on this overdose map, the hotspots are going to line up almost perfectly. And I want to spend not a ton of time, but the bulk of my time talking about juvenile justice issues. This is something that we have seen in the last year and a half to 2 years that is extremely concerning, quite frankly, heartbreaking. When I talk to chiefs around the state, they're seeing the same trend in Albuquerque and Farmington and other places around the state. And that's ultimately kids, when I say kids, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids committing a lot of crime, especially violent crime, and oftentimes with firearms. This slide right here is a screenshot of a social media post from a kid who's been involved in a lot of different crimes. I'll give you kind of a summary, but he posted this right after his case was dismissed by the district attorney for attempted murder for, in my opinion, no reason whatsoever. In January of 23, he was a suspect in a drive-by shooting, including taunting the victim of the shooting. In April of 23, he was cited and released for possession of a firearm by a person under 19 years old. He was given a Class 3 citation release. In August of 23, he was charged with aggravated battery, great bodily harm for the injuries he caused on another child. In the next month, in September of 23, he was charged with attempted murder for shooting a kid 5 times with an AR-15. That's the case that was dismissed when he posted this picture right here. In June of 24, after we had 2 double homicides in one day, he was related to 2 of those victims. He stole his mom's car. He was on pretrial services in Texas with his mom. Stole his mom's car, cut off his ankle bracelet, and is a suspect in 2 drive-by shootings when he came back to Las Cruces. And so right now he is in Las Cruces, not on probation, completely free and clear with no conditions whatsoever. And if you can't see, it's hard. I apologize for the audience, but it says you can get away with murder if you do it right. We're talking about firearms with our kids. Obviously, our kids cannot possess firearms legally. They're under 19. They're not possessing them for any of the lawful exceptions. And almost all the time, almost always, they're stolen from other people, from vehicles or houses. But here's just several, and I apologize to the committee trying to see it. There's some videos that I think you have to see to really paint the picture, and so that's the best I got with this TV. This video right here, if you look at the back of those 2 guns, what's called a Glock switch, that is an item that converts a semi-automatic handgun to a fully automatic handgun, making it a machine gun under federal law. We are seeing those everywhere with our juveniles. Serious problem. I'll show you some videos of drive-bys that they're using a Glock switch to convert it to a fully automatic firearm. There's one area, just to bring it up, of New Mexico law. We do not have any law prohibiting such items. It's obviously illegal under federal law. The problem is AUSAs are overtasked. So it's not that they're not willing to take these cases, but they can't take all the cases. And so we have really nothing we can charge for the possession of these Glock switches, which they're buying on the internet. They could be 3D printed, and so they're all over the place. We have guns in our schools. This picture was taken at Oregon Mountain High School. Guns were recovered. Both children are currently, their cases are being adjudicated. Using guns to threaten our law enforcement. This is a Glock with a Glock switch, so a fully automatic machine gun under federal law, pointed at a Border Patrol agent in his car and posted in social media. I think that's probably all the explanation I need to give. The picture speaks for itself. This is a picture, and it's very difficult probably to decipher the language unless you know slang that doesn't make any sense. But it says emptied the whole clip on the Goofy's crib, which I think we can all kind of figure out what that means, and just basically bragging about a drive-by that was committed in Las Cruces. This is a video that was posted with a stolen AR-15 from an Anthony police unit, and then a drive-by there, or essentially a shooting out the window in the city that they did with it. This is another video of a drive-by. Now, without the sound, it's not going to do it justice, but this is with a fully automatic Glock with the Glock switch. And if, Madam Chair, if you wouldn't mind if I can turn the volume on just real quick. I think the volume on the TV is going to have to be turned up. But I'm going to play this one more time because it's hard to see what's going on without hearing it. All right, I'm just going to get tired of doing this. This is essentially a gun battle between a bunch of kids in the middle of the city that they had live on social media. This is a drive-by that happened 2 weeks ago in Las Cruces where a person that's completely unrelated to anything was shot in the forearm using, again, a Glock with a Glock switch, making it fully automatic. You can hear it, and then you'll see the vehicle pass. This one, I would imagine, would be shocking to everybody here. This is at Young Park. If you're not familiar with Las Cruces, Young Park is in the middle of the city. It's one of our bigger parks. It is surrounded by residential, a middle school, and a few businesses, but primarily residential and apartment complexes all the way around it. For those not familiar, this is Young Park in the middle. It is surrounded by, it's not in the middle of the desert, it's surrounded by mostly houses and apartment complexes and a middle school. And ultimately, there's just a lot of senseless violence. This is not a new phenomenon, but the level of violence we're seeing and the frequency and the volume is new. This is not something that I've seen in my career. This is really since COVID, but especially in the last 2 years. And of course, property crime. There's the auto thefts, the stolen vehicles that the sheriff referenced. We have seen a dramatic increase. A lot of it is Kias and Hyundais, which have a design flaw that you'll see here. But the property crime is also part of this. And I have 12-year-old girls stealing cars weekly. It's extremely shocking. And even more concerning is how often they post their crimes on social media. You'll see there in the ignition, that's what it looks like when they strip everything. This is just a quick video to see how fast they're stealing the cars and why they steal them so often. So just some statistics on our juvenile crime. These are just numbers of the amount of kids that we've detained. That means when it says arrested or detained, they were actually detained by juvenile probation, went to the jail. Class 3 citations means they were cited and released. And then, of course, the totals. That's 2023 and the first 9 months of 2024. This is more telling. This is the repeat offenders for our juveniles. So this, again, is just 2023 and the first 9 months of 2024. So in 21 months, I have one child with 20 separate charges, one with 16, one with 12, two with 11, and at least 5 with 10. And again, that shouldn't be able to happen. We should be able to intervene, preferably long before this, but certainly before they have 20 separate charges within less than a 2-year period. And here's some of the charges. Again, same period of time, 21 months, 5 with homicide. These are all juveniles. 21 aggravated assault, 16 aggravated battery, 39 with burglary, 66 misdemeanor assault, 364 misdemeanor battery, 12 battery on a peace officer, 32 auto theft, 75 unlawful carrying of a deadly weapon. That's a combination of different things, including bringing guns or knives to school, and 7 shooting at a house or dwelling, essentially drive-bys. So some of the issues that I see driving this, and there's a number of problems. It's no easy task to fix any of these things, but there is a lack of accountability for repeat offenders, especially both adult, but when we're talking about juveniles, again, having 20 separate charges in less than 2 years is a problem, especially with the level of violence that some of them have. They're not just shoplifting charges. The risk assessment instrument that's used to authorize detention is extremely inflexible. It doesn't allow us to adapt to the jurisdiction. We shouldn't necessarily be using the same instrument in Las Cruces that they're using in John, New Mexico, or even Albuquerque for that matter. There's also the issue that we can't tailor it to the trends that we're seeing. In many states, the juvenile probation or juvenile justice is left up to the counties with support and funding from the state. And that way they can tailor the response, of course, evidence-based response, and they have to justify the response, but they can tailor it to the individual jurisdiction, but also to the trends that they're seeing. Like right now, again, 2 years ago, this wasn't the issue, and now it is. And hopefully soon it won't be again. And then ultimately a lack of resources and programs to intervene long before we get to this point. I mean, the reality is when we're talking about kids that are shooting indiscriminately at houses and people, we had another 3 drive-bys last night. We've already failed when we get to that point. And so intervening before they're committing violent crimes earlier in the criminal justice system, or preferably before they ever enter the criminal justice system, we have to do a better job of that as a state and as a city. And my last slide. This is just on a separate note, just to kind of illustrate when we've talked a lot about felon in possession, especially this year, and there's been a lot of changes made to the statute over the past several years, and I think those changes are good changes. The problem is we're not seeing those changes have their intended effect, and so on the ground, it's not accomplishing what was intended by the legislature. So just to paint that picture here in Las Cruces, we filed the Las Cruces Police Department 43 felon in possession cases for 2021 and 2022. 27 of those were dismissed or nollied by the prosecutor. 6 pled guilty for a sentence of probation only. They pled guilty to the felon in possession. 4 were incarcerated for other crimes. So as a part of a plea, the felon in possession was dismissed and they pled to murder, or they pled to aggravated assault. 3 were sentenced to incarceration of any length for the felon in possession, but all 3 of those cases also had other crimes with it, like aggravated assault or kidnapping. So it wasn't just for the felon in possession. And 3 are still being adjudicated. It's important to note that not a single case in Doñana County, from the Las Cruces Police Department at least, went to trial for felon in possession in 2021 or 2022. So and that's not a fault of the statute. That's a breakdown of the system at every other level. Madam Chair, with that, we'll stand for questions.
Good. Thank you. I have Representative Chasey. Somebody, could you turn your, thank you. Hold on a second. Chasey, Brand, okay. Worth, Duhigg, Paul? I know you're last. Okay. I think so. Okay, Representative Chasey. I'd like to try to conclude this at around 1:15. So if we could try to keep our questions to about 4 minutes or so, okay? And answers. And I'm going to say what Senator Cervantes likes to say. That's your 4 minutes, and you manage it accordingly. And if people are going on too long from the presenters, cut them off.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Sheriff Stewart, I'm really happy to see you in person. I remember you from testifying in front of the working group to come up with our Civil Rights Act. And I want to thank you for that, and I appreciate the positive presentation. It sounds like things are really, really good, and I hope that I understand that the theme of adequate facilities came up also at our last meeting in Española, and the IPRA issue. So I won't be here, but the rest of you need to get to work on those two things. And I did remember one of your disappointments with the Civil Rights Act, and that was that we didn't put anything into place to ensure that bad actors don't get passed around among all the LEAs. And I don't know if that isn't something we still need to look at in New Mexico. It seems that sometimes when we hear that there's some real egregious violation of civil rights by a law enforcement officer, nobody wants that to happen. I mean, the law enforcement doesn't want it to happen, and neither do the members of the public. And so I guess I just want to encourage you and your colleagues to let the legislature know if what else we can do to address that. I've been on a national group on safe policing, and I know there are things going on in jurisdictions, red and blue jurisdictions everywhere, and so that might be something for us to continue to work on. If you want to say anything about that real quickly.
Very quickly, I'll probably be stoned for saying this by my own, but we need to do a better job of not handing bad actors off. Mm-hmm. I myself suffered that. You may have known we had one of our former deputies sentenced to 9 years. Mm-hmm. He was handed off. Mm-hmm. I won't go into that, yeah. But we need to be more honest as well. I think this is a two-way street. And while I appreciate what you're saying, we can't continue to do that. And by the way, that's not new here and just here. I've been around. It's everywhere.
Right. And that's across the country. I'm hearing that too. So just a couple quick things with the chief. When you gave the number of arrests of juveniles, or even adults, were those without consequences? I know Senator Cervantes was looking into an adult arrest in Santa Fe when we had our last meeting, and the person who shut down the fiesta had been charged dozens of times and never had any consequences. Do you know if any of the, I mean, it seems to me that's pretty much a problem for them to continue to get away with things.
Madam Chair, Representative Chasey, it is a problem. It's difficult to tell you the exact number, but oftentimes because of competency, there's no consequences. Because of the failure of the prosecutor or the officer, we didn't provide discovery, someone didn't show up. A number of reasons, but more often than not, there's not consequences. And it takes a number of cases before that person actually feels like there's consequences.
And Madam Chair, I would submit that's really true with juveniles too. I first started teaching in high school, then I taught middle school, and even when I was practicing law, it seemed like a lot of people who were in trouble had gotten away with a lot of things before, and they didn't fully appreciate where their limits were. And this quick question is the Glock switch is only illegal federally. Do we just need to make that illegal at the state level?
Madam Chair, Representative Chasey, so yes, right now it is only illegal federally. My recommendation, obviously there are people who can legally possess a machine gun by going through the NFA process. Sure. But using a Glock switch is not the process, and I think we need a tool to be able to enforce it at the state level.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. Senator Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you guys both for being here and both of you always for being really so accessible for legislators when we have questions. When I started my term in the Senate 4 years ago, in one of the early days of my very first session, I was called off the floor with a courtesy call that Officer Darian Jarrett had just been murdered in my district. And his murder has actually had a pretty profound impact on my term this 4 years, because coming from a small community of Lordsburg, just a southern New Mexico family, it to this day continues to kind of shake many of my constituents. At the end of my final session on year 4 this year, I was called off the floor as we came to a close, and was a courtesy call again to notify me that Officer Jonah Hernandez had just been murdered. And it is impactful to think that we look over 4 years in my first term in office and how little had actually been done, as we're patting ourselves on the back to keeping New Mexico safe, right? And the reason why it shakes us to our core when we lose a law enforcement officer, too, in my first term, is because if we can't even keep our guardians and our first responders and our protectors safe, then how do we sleep at night knowing that we're safe when even our guardians are not? Senator Cervantes and I had an opportunity to attend the crime forum here in Las Cruces, and I want to thank you, Chief, for putting that on with the governor. It was very well attended, hundreds and hundreds of people from very diverse backgrounds and areas all coming together to make sure that we knew that crime is not an Albuquerque problem anymore, and the impact that it's having on Las Cruces and how quickly crime has just exploded here. Chief Story, you are very, very, very popular in this area by so many people, and I think that is because of your just aggressive approach to just make sure that everyone knows that we're not doing enough to keep our citizens safe. So I would say this: the disappointing thing is that solutions exist. You guys are coming forward saying we have problems in New Mexico, and I appreciate that you're also showing up saying, but there are potential solutions exist. And I don't know the details of what needs to happen, but we know something needs to happen, and it needs to happen soon. Chief Story, you've sent us a number of emails in which you have said very specifically ways we combat crime now is to reform the competency statute reform, pre-trial detention changes and bail reform. We wanted to address law enforcement recruitment and retention, felony in possession, and then collectively, you guys have both said we need to make changes to our IPRA laws. My quick questions to you would be, did you support the drafts that were circulating around special session? If there are changes and you guys are not on the same page, are you working to make sure that everybody is before the upcoming session? And I'm a little bit concerned, Sheriff, that while you had some capital outlay requests, you don't have policy changes in your legislative priority. And so I would also ask, are the police departments working with our Sheriff's Association to make sure that collectively law enforcement is bringing forward proposals that everyone's agreed on? Because the most difficult thing for a legislator is we get there and we have our sheriff who's not on the same page with some of our police departments, and nothing gets done. So is the homework being done in the interim with collective law enforcement agencies to present legislation that we can assist you with in getting it done quickly in this upcoming session?
From the sheriffs, no. No, we don't communicate. The sheriff's affiliate, we generally do not. I don't know why. I think it's lacked leadership. It's lacked cohesiveness. What I've done is I have 8 or 9 sheriffs around the southern part of the state, and we have come together to advance some of our concerns, but it has not been a or a statewide forum. And also bear in mind, we don't interact with the municipal league. So that might be a situation the chief could speak to in terms of how he sees that statewide. But we are a very siloed state. I think I'm stating the obvious for everybody who's been doing this for a while.
Madam Chair, Senator Brantley, we do not do a good job as law enforcement of lobbying or advocating for the positions we think would make a difference. That's the story. I've learned that very quickly in this role. And the New Mexico Association of Chiefs of Police has done an okay job, and I would like to be more involved in that, but what we haven't done is crossed over with the Sheriff's Association so we can present a united front and one voice with what our recommendations are and then back them up. So we need to do better with that. To your first question, the legislation that was circulating for the special session, I think, I think there's some positive stuff in there. The reality is, can we do better with like the competency bill? Yes. And so right or wrong, I understand the position that the legislature was in was very difficult, or at least I can try to understand. And it's done with, and I'm very confident now that we have the time that something that's more robust for competency specifically, but these other issues as well will be presented hopefully next year and pass. And the Supreme Court Commission on Mental Health and Competency has been working on this for a long time. And so I'm willing to say that work has been put in, and I'll put my input in where I can with that draft bill, but I think that's a really good starting point.
Madam Chair, let me also just quickly add, some of this has to do with the district attorney's office. So we have challenges in at least I'll speak for us, with our district attorney. So when you talk about felon with a gun, they're not going to file felon with a gun. The DA will not file. We go federal. Every time we've presented felon with a gun, the federal agencies have filed immediately, the USAs. So I think some of this, it goes back to the siloing, right? I'm talking about they're siloed also. So they're not working with us when we talk about solutions that might work on a grander scale. I think you bring up a very valid point. I just don't see it in my 5+ years. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been contacted
Senator,
I'm sorry.
I think you're well beyond your time.
I apologize. Thank
No,
you.
sorry.
Thank you. I'll
Thank
visit
you.
with both of you guys offline to see how we can help.
Senator Worth and then Senator Duhigg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question to prosecute our way out of this problem. The health system, which quite frankly we're still struggling to do, I think is part of that. So I'll make sure the staff gets this and we get it out to the committee members. And again, I just wanted to flag that. There's a ton of things we could get into, but given the time, I'll yield. Thank you.
Senator Duhigg.
Want to be intervening with juveniles far earlier in the process, but there's a place called the Mendota Juvenile Treatment Center in Wisconsin, where they have taken the highest risk juveniles and they're using cognitive behavioral therapy with them, and they've had amazing results. So with the folks who are getting, the juveniles who are getting this treatment versus their control group, years out there, for the folks who are getting the treatment, there was a 50% reduction in violent crime for them, and no homicides. I mean, these were all kids who were there because they were committing homicides. And it's and this is an approach that we know works. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I have Representative Hall and then Senator Cervantes.
Spike in violent crime and property crime. And I know you covered a lot of things. Is there some way you could just summarize what you think is driving this spike in the last 2 years? Thank you.
Madam Chair, Representative Hall, there's obviously a number of influences, but if you line up the arrival of fentanyl in Las Cruces and the seizures of fentanyl with the same crime graph that I showed you, it lines up. When we saw fentanyl arrive, it's everywhere, and it is really driving a lot of the property crime and some of the violent crime, along with methamphetamine. So if there's one thing you wave a magic wand and get rid of those two things, meth and fentanyl, you will see a lot of the bad stuff go down and go away.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So, Madam Chair, I want to tell both of you how proud I am today to be part of Las Cruces in this community. We have city councilors here. We had the mayor here. I wish you all could know what it's like to be on this committee and go to these presentations in Albuquerque or even Santa Fe. The attitude is completely different. It's a very belligerent, it's a very hostile attitude. You look at my colleagues. We hear them in a lot of excuses, a lot of blame. You all are approaching it very differently. I'm very proud of you, both of you. The Glock switch issue an important one. We saw that it's horrible. I introduced legislation to attack that 2 years ago. It got held up over with my colleagues' committee in the House. What we're doing is we're trying to go after the manufacturers of the Glock switches because that's a federal area. They're preempted. We're going to keep trying to do it, is to go after the manufacturers of the Glock switches and do so. We got it through the Senate. On the crime statistics, Senator Stewart is giving me a hard time. For many years, I would always brag about how crime rates in Las Cruces were so low compared to Albuquerque. And I would do that with a point, which is the state laws are the same around the whole state, but you don't have crime problems. You don't have them in Hobbs and Artesia and Carlsbad. You just don't. And we have them in Albuquerque, and we didn't have it in Las Cruces. We're going the wrong direction, but I appreciate your candor, Chief. I mean, you're embracing it, acknowledging it, and you're not making excuses for it. What is important is that although we're not happy about a 31.6% higher than national average violent crime rate now in Las Cruces, Albuquerque is 275% over the national average. That's 9 times more violent than Las Cruces still, even though we're not happy here, and you're not accepting it here, counselors, and we're not going to accept it here, but Albuquerque, you're 9 times higher, and more important than that is this. El Paso is below the national average on violent crime, below. Right? How is that possible? We can't blame it on the border. We can't blame it on immigration. We can't blame it on poverty. Albuquerque and El Paso are about the same size. They're below the national average, where in Albuquerque is 275% above the national average. There's something wrong with the way things are being done in comparison to our two cities. And people have asked me before, what would you do about it, Big Mouth? And I said, I'd go find out what El Paso's doing, just like you said, or Sheriff said. I send people out to go figure out what they're doing different, right? Come back with a good idea. We had to go send a lot of people to El Paso. We had to bring a lot of people from El Paso into New Mexico. The competency bill is important, but let's talk about competency. When you said, Chief, you talked about 10 people with 10 or more arrests. You said there's 21 people. It's important. Those 21 people are a lot of drag on the resources and the staffing. You're seeing them over. It's still only 21 people. It is still, the competency issue is a drop in the bucket in our big crime picture when we're looking at the big issue. I know it's a lot of resources. And I'm going to go through this quick. Sheriff, I appreciate the fact that you're out in the DAs. We've been doing it on this committee. We look at that felon in possession, 43 people charged, only 13 of them suffered any consequences. Most of those were no-lay prosecutions, right? 27. DAs are just not prosecuting the cases. They're not showing up. The cops are not showing up. DAs aren't doing the job. The cases are getting dismissed. We can pass laws here all day long. We can add sentences here all day long. But if the DAs aren't going to prosecute them, enforce them, if the cops aren't going to do their job, if the courts aren't going to do their job, we're wasting our time. And we're just shining everybody on. We really are. We're just shining everybody on by saying we're going to do more sentences. So I appreciate the candor. Again, I'm saying this over and over. I'm proud of you guys. You're being straight with us, and we don't do that in Santa Fe. We're not straight with people about crime. I've been talking about the DA with the Attorney General to get more involved with the DAs, right, to try and deal with that issue. Your story, Chief, about the juvenile, I hope that we heard that. I hope people will replay that. I hope the media, if they're listening today and out of their pajamas, I don't know if many are here today, look, that story about that juvenile with all the crime that individual has committed and they're on the streets today is terrifying. Right? Violent crimes, gun crimes, and that juvenile's out there today, and we're just waiting for that next shoe to drop, and we know it will. We know it's a matter of time. So thank you. Madam Chair, I know I'm done, but staffing, again, Sheriff, brilliant. Thank you for the point, because everybody in Albuquerque says their crime problem is that we can't hire enough cops, and we give them all the money in the world. We said, you want more money? We'll give you all the money you need, and they still can't hire people, and now we know why. Right, because you've got a different attitude about how to keep people. And I got to tell you, Santa Fe, same story. Chief, you've told me you've got the same problem with staffing. Sheriff, you got to go around the state and tell everybody how to hire millennials and how to get people here, because you're the only person I've heard anybody saying they're staffed. Everybody else is woefully understaffed, and so start teaching how to hire people. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator, and I want to echo that too. I was impressed by what you were appropriate, all of that, and pushback, and as a result, we are understaffed statewide, across the board, in just about every department in the state. One last thing, and then I'll let us all get to lunch. Chief, you mentioned something about lack of data sharing, and data was something that we've been talking about. We have a statute on the book that requires data sharing, so I'm just trying to understand what you were referencing there.
Madam Chair, a couple things. The statute in the book is from 2007 when I started my career, so things have changed from then. It's based around the UCR reporting. Although there are some agencies in New Mexico, well, there's some agencies not reporting at all, but there's some agencies still reporting under UCR, and then the rest of us under NIBRS. And they're not apples to apples, so that creates problems with reporting. And then I think the other thing that's missing that's new is the ballistic reporting. NIBIN is a phenomenal tool, and a lot of crime happens in Albuquerque that's tied to Las Cruces or Alamogordo. And so having every agency report the ballistic data is just one additional tool, especially with combating violent crime.
Okay, so that came up during the session, and I think we had a conversation, and we said nothing is prohibiting from a rule change that would require ballistic reporting, right? So that's something we can do. Okay, thank you.
We had a data reporting bill in the last session. We already have a law that requires the data reporting, as the chair said, and the argument was, well, we need to change the statute to add a requirement for ballistic reporting, which is what you were just talking about. And the chair was talking about. The DPS can do that today. They determine what the reporting requirement is. They determine the forms, the paperwork, the requirements of local law enforcement. If they want ballistic information, the legislature's not standing in the way. DPS simply has to do that tomorrow. Say we want ballistic data, and it's done. It's over. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for supplementing that discussion. I appreciate it. So let's start up at 1:15. There